In today's video, I want to discuss the top 10 NHL players I feel are most likely to regress and be less productive for the coming year than they were last year. I'll give you my top 10 coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, I'm going to give you my top 10 players that I feel are most likely going to regress and be less productive this year than they were last year. Of course, every year we see some players break through and explode for more points or bounce back, and sometimes we see players take steps backwards and be less productive than they were the year before. Sometimes there's a variety of reasons that go into that, including overall team performance. Maybe there's injuries. There's a lot that can go into it, and I'll explain why I've selected each player as we go through them. So let's jump in to the top 10 players that I feel are most likely going to regress this year. Now, first up, I'm going to actually give you two at once because they're teammates as well as line mates and two of the more productive players around the league over the last number of years. But I think this is going to be the year where they do regress a little bit. I don't think it's going to be too drastic, but I do think their point totals will come down a little bit, and that's Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron of the Boston Bruins. Now, of course, it's kind of unusual to see these two guys continue to put up career highs at the ages that they're at. Bergeron's currently 34, Marchand's 31. It's hard to imagine that they're going to continue to go at the pace that they were last year and continue to put up career highs at this stage of their career. It's even unusual to see what they did over the last couple of years, but of course they're exceptional players, a super strong skill set, and obviously play very, very well together, along with the other part of their line here, David Pastrnak, who's had a very positive impact on their line and overall team production here as well. Of course, as we get close to the end of NHL training camps, Patrice Bergeron's already starting things off with a groin injury. Of course, that's not a good way to start your NHL season, but given everything that the Bruins have gone through, that has come off a very deep playoff run, so their summer was obviously short, which is what you want. It means you're having a lot of success. But when you combine that with the fact that they're another year older and that they continue to put up career highs over the last number of years, I think it's only natural to think that they're likely going to take a step back. Now, I don't think their production is going to fall off a cliff or anything like that. I still expect the Bruins to have a really solid, productive, successful season, be a playoff team. I don't expect them to really be, going backwards drastically or anything of that nature, but I do think it's fair to say that Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand will put up less points this year than they did last. Next up, we have Kevin Hayes, who signed with the Philadelphia Flyers as an unrestricted free agent. Of course, he put up career highs last year as mostly part of the New York Rangers. He did spend a little bit of time with the Winnipeg Jets after being acquired at the NHL trade deadline. But Kevin Hayes is another player who I think was grossly overpaid this offseason. I know many Flyers fans even agreed with that when the signing first took place. I do think he's a good fit in Philadelphia. I can see him being productive. I'm just not sure that the money they're paying him is really appropriate, and I think they're going to be disappointed with the results that they're going to get. At this stage of his career, I think Kevin Hayes is already going to start to see some regression. The Flyers organization has a ton of young talent, which eventually here, early in his contract, I think are going to end up surpassing him, and he's going to end up getting moved down to play a lower role in the lineup. And I just don't think Kevin Hayes is going to be able to outdo what he did last year in Philadelphia. Now, based on the fact of the quality of players that he's going to have an opportunity to play with here, especially where they're likely going to put him in the number 2 center role and put Nolan Patrick, when he's healthy, at the number 3 role. But if the season goes on, I can see Patrick working his way up and taking that number 2 spot back. But I do think for a little while at least, Patrick is going to have to be in that number 3 spot. But either way, I just don't have a lot of confidence in Kevin Hayes to outdo himself from last year. And I just think it's going to be a bit of a disappointment during his time with the Flyers. Next up, we have Phil Kessel, who was traded to the Arizona Coyotes this offseason, and I do think Phil Kessel is going to have a productive year. I just don't see him putting up the kind of point totals that he has with the Pittsburgh Penguins over the last number of years. Obviously, Phil Kessel, at one point in time, was with the Toronto Maple Leafs and was kind of looked upon as being the top guy, and things didn't really work out all that well at that point. I mean, Phil Kessel did put up some pretty decent numbers, but the team itself, he's not the main guy. He's more of a secondary complementary piece to kind of help put a team over the top, which is what he was able to accomplish with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But he's going to an Arizona Coyotes team where there's nobody else in that team that I think you can say is better than Kessel. You're looking at a Coyotes team who failed to put up a 20-goal scorer or a 50-point player last year, and even though he will be a big help with that, I think it's only natural, given the quality of players that he's playing with and the style of play, that he's likely going to be putting up less points. Now, Phil Kessel still might be their leading scorer. He still might put up 65, 70 points, but I don't see Phil Kessel being the 90-point player that he's been in Pittsburgh over the last couple of years. Next up, we have Calgary Flames defenseman and captain Mark Giordano, who was the Norris Trophy winner this past season. Now, Mark Giordano, of course, hit a lot of career highs last year and into his late 30s, which is another unusual circumstance that you don't really see very often. So I think it's only natural for him to take a step back and be a little bit less productive for the coming year. Mark Giordano takes fitness very, very seriously and has himself in incredible shape. He remained very healthy, and that's gone a long ways to prolonging his NHL career. He still has a few years left on his existing contract, and he's made it known that he's even open to playing even longer. He doesn't see himself slowing down or retiring anytime soon, so I do think Mark Giordano could be a fixture in Calgary for some time yet, even though he's getting up there in years. But I just think it's only natural that he's going to take some steps back this year, still be very productive. I can see him maybe having a 50-55 point season, but I don't see him putting up the numbers that he did last year, which led him win to the Norris Trophy. Next up, we have Brett Connolly, formerly of the Capitals, who signed with the Florida Panthers as an unrestricted free agent this offseason. Of course, Brett Connolly is another prime example, in my opinion, of somebody who hit career highs, signed a nice increase in pay under contract as a free agent, and are likely not going to live up to those numbers. He's going to be playing further down in the lineup with the Florida Panthers. There's way too many more offensive guys that are ahead of him on the depth chart, and even though he might be semi-productive and be a decent fit with the Panthers organization, I just don't see him topping the numbers that he finished out his time with the Washington Capitals at. I think Brett Connolly, like I say, is going to be a prime example of a guy who hit career highs, became a free agent, signed a contract, and then was started to decline from there. Unfortunately, it happens way too often in the NHL, and I think this is going to be another case of that happening. Next up, we have St. Louis Blues goaltender Jordan Binnington, of course, who came up last year, halfway through the year, led the Blues to the playoffs and eventually to the Stanley Cup, had a terrific run, and as much as I don't think he's going to have a bad year, I just don't see how he can possibly duplicate his regular season from last year and keep that kind of play up for a whole year. It's just going to be really, really tough to do. I just don't think it's logical to think that he can continue to put up those numbers. We saw last year during the playoffs, there were certainly times when he didn't have great games and certainly gave up more goals than he had been in the regular season. And I think after getting his contract and after settling in with a Stanley Cup victory last year, it's only natural with everything going on that he's going to still be a solid goalie, but not nearly running at the pace that he did last year. I still think he's going to have a pretty decent year, but I can see him maybe struggling a little bit and not taking on as many games as many people thought he might going into next year. I think they're still going to be thankful to have an experienced guy like Jake Allen in the fold with the St. Louis Blues as his backup, and I do think he will still be the starting goaltender. I just don't see him running at the crazy numbers he was putting up with the Blues during the second half of last year. Next up, we have Elias Lindholm of the Calgary Flames. Now, Lindholm is another player who put up career numbers last year. Of course, Lindholm put up career numbers last year, largely to the fact that he found a lot of chemistry with his new line mates Johnny Gaudreau and Sean Monahan of the Calgary Flames. I do think Lindholm is going to be continuing to be productive. I can still see him playing with those guys and having a pretty solid year, but based on the numbers he put up last year, I'm just not sure that he can top those numbers. I think we might see some regression, but in the future, I can see Lindholm breaking those career highs down the road. I just think that this year he's going to take some steps back before he can take additional steps forward. Next up, we have another free agent signing, and that's Matt Duchene of the Nashville Predators. Actually, for the Ottawa Senators, they could not work out a long-time extension with Duchene, and they ended up trading him to Columbus, and they as well were not able to retain him. He made his way down to Nashville, where many people thought he would eventually end up for quite some time. It's been well known that he loves the city of Nashville, and basically has been very interested in going there for at least a few years now. But in my opinion, Matt Duchene is a really good hockey player. But he was in a contract year last year, and unfortunately for some players, they do tend to put up career highs when they're playing for a contract, and they tend to regress. And I just see Matt Duchene being one of those guys. I'm really not convinced 100% that Matt Duchene has the drive and the passion, the dedication to this game that some of the other top superstars around the NHL do. And now that he's got his long-term extension and playing with a team like Nashville, who has struggled offensively as well at times, I can see his numbers taking a step back and not being that number one center that they really thought they could get. Now, I know he also has a teammate in Ryan Johansson who can be a number one center as well, but even Johansson as a number one center hasn't been the most productive, considering he's also making $8 million. They have two guys now at the center ice position making that kind of money, and I'm not sure you're going to see either one putting up huge point totals. So I do think Matt Duchene will be semi-productive. I think he'll be a decent fit in Nashville, but I don't see him continuing the numbers that he had going last season. And my last player who I think is bound to regress a little bit this year is Max Domi of the Montreal Canadiens. Now, again, Max Domi had an awesome career year last year, really stepped up his game, really thrived in Montreal, and a lot of things really went well for Montreal last year. They had a lot of guys hitting career highs, and as much as I think the team is poised to take another step forward, and they have a lot of good things going for them, I'm not saying here that Domi's going to have a bad year or that the Habs are going to have a bad year, but I can see him taking some steps back on the production. I mean, if you take a look at around their team, you had guys like Thomas Tatar, Brendan Gallagher, Max Domi, you had Kotkaniemi having a solid rookie year. Like, it's just unusual to have so many guys hitting career highs all at the same time. They're bound to have some regression take place and a little bit of a market correction, if you will. And I think Max Domi is unfortunately going to be the guy to do that. I still see him being a solid, productive player, doing way better than he did with the Coyotes organization, but I can see him taking some steps back this year a little bit in his production, still being a solid player though, and helping the Habs have success, just not at the level he did last year. So those are the top 10 players I have pegged to regress in their production for the coming 19-20 season. Of course, keep in mind, this is just my opinion. Just because I picked these players to regress in their production doesn't mean I don't like them. It doesn't mean I think they're going to have a terrible year or their team's going to have a terrible year. So just let me know what you think down in the comments. And if there's other players you think are more likely to regress this year, let me know what you think in the comments and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.